Your day is a pie chart. We slice our precious 24 hours into three perfectly equal, non negotiable packages. It feels completely natural. But this neat daily rhythm is actually a dusty relic of 19th century industrial panic. Enter Robert Owen. In 1817, factory owners routinely worked children and adults for 16 grueling hours every day. People were literally melting. Owen realized that dead workers make terrible consumers and even worse, factory cogs. So, he invented a slogan: 8 hours of labor, 8 hours of recreation, and 8 hours of rest. It was pure marketing genius. He packaged the complex problem of industrial exploitation into a simple, satisfying math problem. Capitalists initially laughed him off, but decades of strikes and riots eventually forced governments to adopt Owen's magical ratio. Then came Henry Ford. Ford realized that giving workers their 8 hours of leisure allowed them to buy his cars. The deal was sealed. We traded the dangerous textile mills for comfortable office cubicles, but kept the exact same schedule. Now, we manufacture spreadsheets. We pretend that staring at a monitor for 8 hours yields the same output as weaving cotton. It obviously does not. Modern cognitive work operates on bursts of energy rather than steady, robotic factory endurance. Yet we obey the clock. We drag ourselves through the day to hit a metric invented for steam-powered looms. It is a holy trinity. We blindly sacrifice our days to a 19th century compromise that we never actually voted for. Let us travel back to 1817. Our protagonist was a wealthy Welsh textile manufacturer who possessed an incredibly rare asset for his time. He actually cared about his workers. This was highly inconvenient for his fellow capitalists who preferred their labor cheap and exhausted. The industrial era was a nightmare. Human beings routinely spent 16 hours a day performing mind-numbing tasks inside dark and dangerous factories. Sunlight was a rare luxury. Toddlers were employed to clean under spinning machines because their tiny hands could easily reach the gears. It was a brutal system. Society operated on the simple belief that if poor people stopped working, they would immediately turn to crime. Rest was considered a sin. Owen realized that exhausted workers were not particularly efficient at spinning cotton. He decided to change things, but Owen did not use complex medical data or psychological studies to design his new schedule. He just really liked math. Specifically, Owen possessed a deep and borderline obsessive love for clean symmetrical fractions. The number 24 is beautiful. It can be divided neatly by many numbers, but 3 is by far the most satisfying. He wanted 3 equal parts. This simple division became the foundation of his entire campaign for social reform. He created a catchy slogan. He demanded 8 hours of labor, 8 hours of recreation, and 8 hours of rest. It sounded incredibly poetic. It rolled off the tongue much better than demanding 9 hours and 15 minutes of work. Marketing beat out actual science. There was absolutely zero biological evidence that 8 hours was the optimal time for human output. Nobody tested this theory. Owen simply assumed that humans operated best when their lives were split into perfect thirds. It was a beautiful fantasy. In reality, the slogan was a desperate defensive move to stop workers from dying in the streets. The factory owners laughed. They believed that reducing work hours would instantly bankrupt the entire British Empire. Owen was called a madman. His fellow industrialists argued that the human body was built for endless, uninterrupted toil. But the workers listened. They took Owen's catchy mathematical slogan and painted it onto giant protest banners. The math became a myth. What began as a neat fraction to save lives eventually solidified into an unquestionable law of nature. We never updated the math. We simply inherited a 200-year-old marketing campaign and called it a career. This dusty old Welsh dream found its true home on the American factory floor. Enter Henry Ford. Ford was not a romantic dreamer looking to save humanity from the horrors of toil. He was an efficiency obsessive. In the early 1900s, his shiny new assembly lines faced a catastrophic labor problem. Workers hated the monotony. They quit in droves because staring at a single bolt all day induced existential dread. Turnover was ruinously expensive. So in January of 1914, Ford announced a radical experiment that shocked the industrial world. He doubled the daily wage. More importantly, he slashed the standard working shift from 9 hours down to 8. The public was astonished. Newspapers praised him as a saintly benefactor who cared deeply for the working class. It was pure public relations. In reality, Ford had simply calculated that exhausted humans make incredibly expensive mistakes. Tired hands drop bolts. Furthermore, cutting the shift to 8 hours allowed for perfect mathematical division of the day. 3 shifts fit perfectly. The factory could now run 24 hours a day without a single second of downtime. The machines never slept. Humans were merely the biological components swapped out to keep the steel warm. It was beautiful geometry, but Ford's true stroke of genius lay outside the walls of the factory. Exhausted people do not buy things. If a worker spends 12 hours in a factory, he only has time to sleep. He cannot go shopping. Ford realized that his workers needed free time to actually use his mass-produced cars. Leisure is consumer fuel. By giving them 8 hours of rest, he created his own target market. The loop was closed. The worker earned the money to buy the car they built in their spare time. It was brilliant capitalism. Other corporate giants quickly realized that happy, rested workers bought significantly more stuff. The standard spread rapidly. What began as an anti-capitalist protest had been weaponized into the ultimate sales funnel. Then came the Great Depression. The government needed a way to spread scarce jobs among millions of unemployed citizens. Enter the New Deal. In 1938, President Franklin Roosevelt signed the Fair Labor Standards Act into law. The law codified 8 hours. It did not actually forbid companies from working their employees into the ground. It just made it expensive. Naturally, corporations found a loophole. They simply moved the factory floor from physical brick buildings into our glowing digital screens. The walls disappeared, but the invisible boundary of the 8-hour day remained firmly stamped onto our collective consciousness. Then came the Great Liberation. Remote work promised to finally break the shackles of the traditional 19th century industrial schedule. It was a lie. Instead of escaping the office, we simply invited the factory manager to sleep in our guest bedrooms. The commute was gone. The boundary between living and working dissolved into a single, endless gray smudge. You are always home, which unfortunately means you are also always available to answer urgent emails about nothing. Knowledge work is notoriously fluid. Most modern cognitive tasks can actually be completed in about 2 highly focused hours. That leaves 6 hours. 6 long hours of empty space that must be filled to justify your salary. Welcome to Presence Theater. This is the art of looking incredibly busy while doing absolutely nothing of substance. The tools are simple. We purchase mechanical mouse jigglers to keep our virtual status dots a comforting green. The green dot is holy. If the dot turns orange, the corporate deity assumes you have abandoned your post. So we play the game. We schedule emails to depart at midnight to simulate a heroic work ethic. Robert Owen is pleased. His ghost demands 80 years of tribute paid in the currency of pointless status updates. We try to escape. The 4-day workweek trial became the latest darling of the corporate reform movement. It sounded like heaven, but most companies simply compressed 40 hours of panic into 4 slightly longer days. The pressure only intensified. Employees traded a leisurely 5-day pace for a breathless 4-day sprint. The math never changed. We are still worshiping the exact same total output demanded by Victorian factory owners. Only the interface is different. We replace the physical punch card with a digital ping that demands our constant attention. The ghost remains undefeated. We cannot leave the screen because we have equated screen time with moral virtue. Idle hands are still sins. And so we sit in the dark, typing into the void to appease a dead reformer. This void is remarkably efficient. Today, the physical walls of the 19th century factory have completely dissolved into the digital cloud. The assembly line lives in your pocket. We no longer leave our labor behind when the evening bell rings at the factory gate. Now, the factory pings you at midnight, yet we still pretend our days are sliced into 3 perfectly equal, independent packages. It is a comforting mathematical fiction. Your 8 hours of recreation are actually spent recovering from the physical and mental toll of work. The boundaries have entirely dissolved. We check corporate emails in bed, blending Robert Owen's neat categories into a stressful gray sludge. This is the modern trifecta. Human brains do not operate like the steam-powered looms of the early Industrial Revolution. Cognitive energy is not linear. Squeezing creative digital labor into a rigid industrial schedule is like trying to fuel a laptop with coal. Yet we keep shoveling. Companies still measure productivity by desk-bound presence because counting hours is much easier than measuring actual value. Presence is the ultimate metric. We have constructed a global civilization on the premise that humans are designed to run like clockwork. Our biology strongly disagrees. Natural circadian rhythms are sacrificed daily to appease a dead reformer's obsession with the number 8. Math triumphs over medicine. We struggle to conceive of a world structured around human energy rather than arbitrary factory shifts. True freedom feels terrifying. So we drink another coffee and log back in to keep the grand illusion spinning. The loop remains perfectly intact. Just remember that your modern burnout was brought to you by a 19th century Welsh marketing campaign.